The views and opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Natural Bridges Media or KSQD's staff, volunteers, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Talk of the Bay. It's good to have you with us. I'm your host, Len B.A., and my guest today is Anna Scanlon of Represent Us. Anna Scanlon is campaign advisor at Represent Us. She is a political strategist with experience managing and serving in senior roles on campaigns at the presidential, statewide, congressional, and state legislative levels. She is passionate about designing and executing winning campaign plans and building strong, effective, and enthusiastic teams. Prior to her career as a campaign operative, Anna received her BA in International Relations and Government from the University of Texas at Austin. She is a native of Washington, D.C., and is very happy to have recently moved to Southern California, which she plans to make her forever home. Anna Scanlon, welcome to Talk of the Bay.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Great. You've been working with Represent Us for a while, and Represent Us refers to itself as America's leading anti-corruption organization and has been around for about a decade. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the organization's mission and what are the issue, what's the big picture issue that you're trying to deal with.
Absolutely. Yeah, you touched on some of the big things already right there. But, Represent Us is America's leading nonpartisan grassroots organization fighting, as you mentioned, against corruption, fighting to strengthen and protect democracy, and really with a focus on bringing together unlikely allies, folks from all walks of life, voters of all stripes from across the spectrum to pass pro-democracy laws, fight corruption, take on authoritarian threats. And I think speaking to your question of the overall mission, something that we are very conscious of and what personally motivated me to get involved in this work was the growing sense among Americans, again, across the spectrum, that our democracy just really is not working for us. Whether that's a cause of corruption or broken electoral systems, campaign finance reform being needed, et cetera. People are just increasingly conscious that what we have going on here is not working. And Represent Us is about, again, bringing together folks from all over the country in states like California, from coast to coast, to pass laws, volunteer, organize, advocate in the public sphere for a variety of policies that are moving us towards restoring America's democracy and making it stronger than ever before. And the last thing I'll say is another thing that really attracted me to this work and to Represent Us in particular, coming from a personal background of working on candidate campaigns and getting into this pro-democracy space, was the Represent Us theory of change, which is really following in the footsteps of major successful national movements in our country's history, like women's suffrage, the push for interracial marriage, marriage equality. We recognize that for any change to happen, any significant national change in this country, it takes playing a long game, working over several years in several states, sometimes decades, to secure reforms that make a change at the local level, at the state level, and then ultimately lead to the possibility for nationwide reform. So that would be my kind of broad overview of what we're all about.
From what you're telling me, you're saying you're building it from local, state, and not trying to do the big sweep, national legislation that's going to reform it all the way across the country. And there was a bill introduced in the 2020 Congress, or 2021 Congress, I guess more accurately, which was known as H.R. 1, which was trying to do a broad sweep. It would have reformed how redistricting is done. It guaranteed certain voting rights all across the board, and it never even got a hearing in the Senate. It didn't pass. And that seems to underscore what you're saying about in the past, movements haven't succeeded by these sort of broad top-down reform efforts, but have been built from the bottom up. Is that an accurate reflection? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we're always excited to see any sweeping national legislation like that and have in the past worked to support efforts like that at the national level in Congress, in DC. And, circumstances can arise where legislation like that can be passed and make a, huge national impact somewhat overnight, but it's not the norm, kind of to your point. It is, and that's really a function of who is in Congress, right? Everyone that's in Congress comes from a state where they are represented, where they're responsive to their constituents, whether that's in their congressional district or, if they're a senator, just statewide. And that's, again, why it really comes down to a bottom-up, grassroots-led movement being so important to making that kind of lasting national change, or introducing legislation like that and passing it, having any hope of that, is really about, are there people on the ground in states across the country and districts across the country where national leadership in Congress is going to recognize that this is something that's important to their constituents? Because unfortunately, there's decent amount of evidence, especially in the past few decades, that those people that represent us in the halls of Congress often are not voting in alignment at all, really, with their memberships their constituents. And we know it's plainly obvious, I think anyone that's remotely interested in politics, that a huge percentage of Americans are deeply dissatisfied with the way that our government is functioning, or rather not functioning. And that grassroots movement does exist, that desire from the voters is there. And I think we see our charge at Represent Us as helping to bring those people together, harnessing that shared national desire in every corner of the country, and working towards specific, concrete political victories that, to your point, yes, get us closer to things like that bill in 2020 having a chance of passing.
And could you describe what some of the policies are that you're trying to promote at this point?
Sure, absolutely. I can speak to just kind of top lines on, mentioning some of the ones that we support, and then happy to dig into any details for folks who might not be as wonky as we are. But there's a handful. One that was my sort of broad portfolio over the past cycle was working on ranked choice voting. A lot of the campaigns and coalitions that I worked with directly in 2022 were working to pass ranked choice voting ballot initiatives in their localities, municipalities, counties, and states, which is a shift from the way that we typically run elections, where you have a primary and they have a general and a bunch of people from each party in the primary, and they go to the general, and changes the electoral structure in a significant way that has a lot of pro-democracy benefits. We also support a broad variety of campaign finance reforms. One such campaign that I was delighted to be able to work with this year that was successful was actually in Oakland, California, the Oakland Campaign for Fair Elections, which passed several campaign finance, ethics, sort of lobbying reform, big ticket items, which is really exciting to see. And that was overwhelmingly successful, which is really cool. And there's various other campaign finance, sort of putting campaign funding back in the hands of the voters types of policies we support, such as democracy vouchers, which is a really cool one that I personally just think is really awesome and exciting. And then, of course, things like anti-gerrymandering, supporting independent redistricting efforts, so that we are giving power back to the people, in that we're not just drawing these crazy district lines around whatever benefits those politicians in that moment. again, that's relevant in California for anyone that's remotely aware of what's been going on in Los Angeles in the past couple of months with the big scandal in the city council there. And, beyond that, I think on a sort of electoral protection, election integrity basis, obviously supporting things like vote by mail, increasing ease of access to voting, voter registration, supporting just broadly anything that preserves and protects and promotes our election integrity, and makes it easier to vote, especially in a time when our electoral system is increasingly under attack itself, which I think, interestingly, was not really an issue even 10 years ago when Represent Us was founded, at least not the huge kind of national issue that it is now. So a bunch of fun things. And that's sort of a brief overview.
Yeah. And I want to come back to the attack on democracy, we could call it, which is an ongoing phenomenon. But you referred to so many great types of reforms. One of them was ranked choice voting, and I understand that you were involved in campaigns that were successful in Portland, Oregon, and in Nevada, and perhaps elsewhere. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about those campaigns and your experience with getting those successfully into law.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, it's a fun part of this job for me is getting to work with and help support a bunch of campaigns at the same time, as opposed to my past life as a campaign manager where it's just the one thing. And even more fun is when everyone wins up and down the slate. So that was really exciting. I had a lot of victories all over the country. Another thing too, again, with this bottom up local first overall strategy is, there's so many nuances and idiosyncrasies in each place. So every campaign where we were supporting ranked choice voting was very different, had its own unique flavor and political landscape, et cetera. But ultimately, we were able to help support ranked choice voting become the law of the land in places like the ones you mentioned. So to speak first off to Nevada, actually, that's the only one of the campaigns that we supported this year for ranked choice voting. That's actually a fun quirk of the Nevada law, is to pass a constitutional amendment in the state of Nevada. It has to be with a ballot initiative. You have to win 2 cycles in a row. So we were able to win this year, and we have to actually win again, do the same thing over again in 2024 to fully lock that in as law in Nevada. But the good news is we were able to get on the ballot and then win a pretty solid victory in the state of Nevada for a constitutional amendment that would overhaul the electoral system in Nevada to have open primaries and to have ranked choice voting in the general election, which is really exciting. Particularly given that statewide ranked choice voting is only something that exists currently in Maine and Alaska. So this would make Nevada the 3rd state in the country to use ranked choice voting for state elections, which obviously would be a huge win.
And that's the biggest population of those 3 states, certainly.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And it's also cool, for a lot of reasons. Nevada's very near and dear to my heart because I've worked there a lot and lived there. And it's a fun, funky state politically, if you're like a political nerd. But it's exciting from a national sort of strategic perspective for a lot of reasons. I think not the least of which it's a really diverse state. It's a young state. It's a state with a great kind of cross section demographically in terms of age, economy, race, religion, et cetera. And it's also, an early primary state and presidential primary. So it does in a way have a sort of outsize, given its relatively small population, an outsize way that it features, I guess, in the national press, frankly. So exciting for a lot of reasons. And of course, most of all being that it's great for the people of Nevada.
Yeah. And could you describe, I've worked with Fair Vote in the past, so I'm very familiar with ranked choice voting, but I wonder if you could describe how the Nevada policy would work exactly?
Sure. So, as I mentioned, it would shift to open primaries and then ranked choice voting in the general. So, right now, we have closed primaries in Nevada, which means anywhere you have closed primaries, which is really one of the most restrictive electoral systems, period. It's one of the best ways that a very small elite group of whether it's party insiders or powerful special interests can sort of set the playing board, I guess, for what happens in the general. Because if you have closed primaries, what that means is in a primary where way less voters turn out, just because people don't think about it, they don't know about it, they don't hear about it. If you have a closed primary and you have a handful of candidates on either side, it's one very easy for the powers that be, as I mentioned, to line up behind their person. Okay, this is the pick that, from the special interest or the inside baseball players, and to support that person. And often, that person can be much more extreme than the general base of either party or the general voting electorate in the general, and can win a primary nomination with very few votes because few people turn out. Closed primaries often lead to more extreme candidates and or candidates who are, sort of the chosen pick of the powers that be getting on the ballot for the general. And then if it's one against one in the general election and that's it, 50% plus one, you win. That is how we often see people getting elected to offices, small and large, who may not be representative at all of the broader population. So
Right.
in
The
Nevada,
lesser of two evils game.
exactly. Yes, that's one of the kind of best things that we like to talk about with ranked choice voting. And the thing that really gets people excited about it is exactly that ranked choice voting eliminates the need for lesser of two evils voting, because you no longer have to make that tough choice. You can rank your candidates. And I'll get to that, explain that in a little bit more detail. But going back to in Nevada, if we pass again in 24, just to close that loop, it would change from closed primaries to open primaries. So anybody, and I think that includes, it's adding something like 660,000 independent and nonpartisan registered voters in Nevada who previously were excluded from the primary process because of closed primaries, who now can vote in the open primaries. So that's a huge win, just massively increasing the amount of Nevadans that can vote in primaries. So that's
Yeah.
exciting. Yeah, love that. That's one of my kind of favorite features there. And then ranked choice voting in the general, again, when you have a typical general election, the way most of us vote, you have your two candidates and, 100,000 votes. And whoever, if you get 50,001, then congratulations, you win, right?
Right.
With ranked choice voting, you go into the voting booth. It's a similar type of ballot, except the difference being you can rank as many of the candidates on your ballot as you want to. So this is my first choice, this is my second choice, this is my third choice, and so on. And anyone to get elected has to have 50% of the vote to win. So if any candidate of however many are on the ballot gets 50%, they win outright. But if that's not the case, then you have the candidates receiving the least amount of votes, having their votes reallocated to whoever your next choice would be, and so on. So instead of having, someone be elected who is, again, not representative of a huge percentage of voters, it really increases the representation that all voters see overall in who ends up ultimately being elected. Because again, to your point, you don't have to waste your vote. You don't have to make a choice lesser of two evils. You don't have to vote strategically, as people often do. And you can really vote your conscience and be more likely to see more representative candidates on the ballot in the first place.
Yeah. And with the top five moving to the general, I like that idea. California has this top two thing, which I think is mathematically erroneous. But with it top five going and then ranked choice voting, you're really getting an opportunity. And the thing I love about ranked choice voting is it eliminates the spoiler phenomenon, because you can vote for the one you really like best.
Yep.
and knowing that they may have a slim chance of winning. But if they don't win, then your second choice vote goes to your second choice candidate. And if they don't get it, your third choice vote goes to you. So, I love that about it. And it would have changed the outcome in lots of elections in the past to have a system like that, from local to national. So that's, it's wonderful to see that progressing as it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, all those things you spoke to are both things that voters on the ground, whether in Nevada or, all over the country in different places, really love and embrace about it. And again, also just things for me personally, I think it's really heartbreaking when you're so passionate about politics to talk to people and to know that there's so many people out there who just don't vote because they feel like their vote doesn't matter. They're like, why am I going to show up, take time out of my day to vote for someone who, or have two options. I got to pick one and I don't like either of them, and I don't even know how they got there because I missed the primary. And shifting that to having a slate of candidates who provide much broader choices. That's another thing that is exciting about ranked choice voting is that, really opens up the ability for a broader range of candidates to run and actually have a chance. As I spoke to earlier, sort of the traditional way of doing things often leads to really extreme candidates getting on the ballot and or candidates who are handpicked by, the quote unquote kind of powers that be, special interests, party insiders, et cetera. And even people who aren't paying religiously close attention to politics can sense very easily when whatever candidates they're seeing on the news are those types of candidates versus people that are running for better reasons and represent a broader array of viewpoints. And I think that's really exciting too, is the chance to provide better a range of candidates and also better representation, so that it's not, again, just, half of us in this camp and half of us in that camp, even if there's much more diversity than 50-50 in viewpoints.
Oh, yeah. If you're just joining us, my guest is Anna Scanlon. Anna is campaign advisor at Represent Us. And Represent Us is an anti-corruption organization whose goal is to make America the world's strongest democracy by 2050. Anna, how was the ranked choice policy in Portland, Oregon that passed in the election? How was that different from the structure of the one in Nevada?
Yeah, great question. Very different, totally different thing, even though ultimately ranked choice is a big part of both of ballot initiatives that passed. And the Portland example is exciting for me, especially because what happened in Portland with ranked choice was part of a bigger charter reform movement in that city that I think has a lot of promise for the future in other mid-size and big municipalities across the country that I would love to see replicated, and certainly folks looking to the example in Portland for success. So some broader context in Portland, the city of Portland had not revised their charter since 1913 in any kind of major way. So been over 100 years, obviously with a population that had greatly expanded in size and greatly changed in terms of demographics, et cetera. But over 100 years that Portland had been stuck with this sort of arcane governance structure from the early 20th century. And so every 10 years, Portland has a charter review commission that is convened to look at the charter, think about it, recommend some ballot initiatives, and then folks go and vote on it. So around 2 years ago, when the most recent charter review commission was convened, a group of really incredible activists, community organizations, and just wonderful folks that we were very happy to be able to work with and support came together around passing a sort of overall package of reforms to update the charter of the city of Portland. And that ultimately became the Portland United for Change campaign, which put or supported a ballot initiative that was placed on the ballot by the Charter Reform Commission, which essentially did three things. It was to make significant changes to the sort of city governance structure in terms of the roles and responsibilities of the city manager, mayor, city council, et cetera, to change the size of the council from 5 members to 13, which obviously makes the Portland City Council much more representative with a bigger population. And then to introduce proportional ranked choice voting with multi-member districts in this expanded district. So bringing in ranked choice voting for Portland elections to make the elections in Portland, again, much more representative, eliminating the need for, as we've talked about at length here, strategic voting, lesser of two evils voting, providing much more choices and representative representation in a city that, as I said, has changed and grown and developed a lot, particularly in the diversity of its communities and the voices that need to be represented. So that was really exciting to be able to work with Portland United for Change there for over a year, and to see that initiative passed by almost 60%, which
Wow.
is pretty incredible and really exciting. And the kaleidoscope of organizations and community leaders and activists that came together on the ground in Portland deserve just a huge amount of credit for a very long and hard-fought and successful campaign.
And it sounds like that was building over time. I mean, they were part of the
Mhm.
charter review, and that was a multi-year process, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So the folks with Portland United for Change, the Charter Review Commission, which is appointed, it's a 20-member appointed independent commission. So they're appointed 2 years before the, November 22 or whatever it is, election. They spend the first year sort of meeting, doing prep work, like doing research, getting experts to come testify, et cetera. And then in the first half of this year, sort of during the primary season, they collectively got, feedback from the community, put together a list of their proposed amendments, received community input on the proposed amendments, and then ultimately referred amendments like the one that was just passed to the ballot. And yeah, the campaign was there in that process right from the beginning. They were providing a lot of really helpful and influential expertise and research and community outreach and support, which, was really fun for me personally to get to be a part of that and watch that happen and support however we were able. And then, of course, this year, again, sort of boosting, ramping up those efforts of providing community input and feedback on the proposed amendments, showing the research that, overwhelmingly majority of voters in Portland really wanted to see significant change to the city charter. And then once it was on the ballot, running a really ambitious, bold, enthusiastic campaign that was obviously in the end very successful.
That's great. Congratulations. I'm so happy to hear that outcome coming from different parts of the country.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was really great to see that in Portland. And as we saw in Nevada and we saw in Portland and we've seen in a lot of places that we try to support this kind of work, there's always opposition, because when you are talking about major changes to the electoral system that benefit whoever it is that they currently benefit, those people, surprise, surprise, want to come out and say it's not a good idea and it's actually bad for the voters of X, Y, and Z place. But as it turns out, most people recognize that the status quo, the electoral system is not working for them. And so this year was really a big sign of encouragement that people recognize that they're excited about these kinds of reforms and they're willing to go out and vote for them.
Terrific. We're going to take a really short break. We'll be right back with Anna Scanlon of Represent Us after this. Don't go away. If you're just joining us, my guest is Anna Scanlon, campaign advisor at Represent Us, an organization that works to protect and strengthen democracy in the United States. Anna, we were talking about the campaigns in Nevada and Portland, Oregon, around ranked choice voting. And you mentioned, there's opposition, of course. And it seems like money is such a huge issue in politics. In this last election cycle, billions of dollars were spent by campaigns around the country. And in many cases, one side will outspend the other, as happened here in a couple local initiative elections, by as much as 5-1 or 6-1. So money is such a big deal. And I wondered if you could talk about the kinds of policy reforms that Represent Us is trying to promote that would address the issue of money in politics.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And another one that's very near and dear to my heart personally. I think actually it's a great opportunity to highlight the campaign that we were very excited to support in Oakland, California this year, which won with, I believe, 74% of the vote, if I'm not mistaken, which was really exciting. So Oakland just passed the Oakland Fair Elections Act, which does a couple of things to make elections fair, confront the issue of money in politics, and involves a variety of policies that we found really exciting when we first learned about this campaign and we're excited to support. First of all, enacting greater transparency. It introduced more transparency, more access to information on contribution sources and amounts. One of the biggest ways that big spenders in politics get away with spending so much money and doing so behind the scenes, obviously, is things like independent expenditures where they can contribute however much they feel like and often don't have to disclose, etc. So seeing in Oakland greater transparency for who's giving what and how much is a huge step in the right direction to shining a light on who's funding elections and who's playing that significant role. Another big thing that we're really excited about, a nascent idea across the country that I don't think exists in a lot of places yet, but is really taking off, is democracy dollars. So Oakland will be providing 4 $25 certificates to voters in Oakland to contribute to candidates for each election, any candidates of their choosing, which is really awesome because I think, we hear so much about billions of dollars going into presidential elections and even smaller local elections being hundreds of thousands or sometimes millions of dollars. I think a lot of folks know that. They hear that and they just think, well, what does my $5, matter? What does my $25 matter? And obviously for most people, 25 bucks or $100 is an expense. It's something to think about. And why am I going to spend that on politicians where it doesn't even matter if I, have my own bills to pay? And putting even $100 total in the hands of every voter in Oakland to allocate to candidates that they support is a really awesome way of democratizing the campaign finance process. And what I hope people realize about that piece in particular is you might not think $100 is a lot for you to give to a candidate. You might think it is, you might think it's in the middle, but what really matters is overall, every voter in Oakland having access to that makes a huge difference, because the way it works now is you've got a few hundred people or a few thousand people, a very small number of people who can make huge contributions. And that's, how they have so much influence. But when you have tons of people, the vast majority giving just a little bit here and there, that can be incredibly powerful. So that's really, really exciting. And then additionally, imposing contribution limits, so lowering individual limits to $600 for individuals, $1,200 for committees. Again, that's a really great way to take power away from the mega big buck spenders and put it back in the hands of voters. And then limiting lobbying. There's a 3-year ban now on lobbying for officials leaving office to become lobbyists. So that covers a bunch of different policies that we're really excited to see in Oakland and are the kind of thing that we are hoping to see in more places around the country, and excited to be able to support that kind of work.
And it seems like since the Supreme Court decision some years ago to open up sort of unlimited financial contributions in federal elections, it's really gotten out of hand. Are there policies in the works? Is stuff being developed that could affect that on the national level as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, overturning Citizens United is something that um, we obviously would, love to see happen. I think along with most people in the country that are not directly, creating super PACs and what have you. I think the unfortunate reality, as I see it personally, is that, we have the Supreme Court that we have right now. Those are lifetime appointments, and getting a court, at the Supreme Court level that is amenable to overturning Citizens United does not seem to me like something that we should be expecting. Frankly, I hate to say it, in the next, in the immediate future. Now you never know what could happen. And it is something that's worth fighting for. But I think, it's a challenge. And also, to be honest, I think at the federal level in Congress, there are good anti-corruption and campaign finance laws that are proposed, sometimes that are passed. I think there was one in the last session. I could be wrong, but I think there was one around disclosure for congressional members, involved in trading on the stock market. Not sure what actually happened with that, but it can be challenging to ask those members of Congress that got elected under the current system to change the system that got them there, frankly.
Yeah.
And so I think, again, that's why this kind of change at the local level is so critical, because if we start seeing more and more and bigger localities and states at the local level that are passing things like democracy vouchers, democracy dollars, that are imposing these more stringent contribution limits, that leads to elected officials who support those things in those places. That leads to an upswell of grassroots interest and activity around those issues. And that flows upwards to affecting what happens at the national level. So to answer your question, I don't know off the top of my head of any current legislation in DC or goings on at the Supreme Court that are going to make a big impact on campaign finance at the national level. But I think there's a lot to be enthusiastic about at the state level that can have an impact in the near future, hopefully on the national front.
Great. Well, I know you only have a few minutes left before you have to run off to another commitment, and I want to invite you to, talk about your work in the big picture, and perhaps in the context of the more extreme attacks on democracy we've seen in the recent past, where you see your work taking you and where the nation is hopefully headed.
Sure. Well, I learned, after working on campaigns, to get out of the prognostication business as much as possible. Can't say that I know where things are heading. And I will say, though, this most recent midterm cycle, obviously, as I mentioned, represent us, be able to support a swath of campaigns across the country, and seeing all of those campaigns for ranked choice voting and campaign finance reform, et cetera, be successful was hugely encouraging. So that alone makes me feel really excited about the next few cycles and the future overall. And I think as well, frankly, this cycle, there was a lot of really intensely anti-democracy rhetoric in the election, people running on things that, even 5-10 years ago would just never have made it anywhere near the mainstream, including a couple of really close, races at the federal and statewide levels. And on a personal front, I think I was surprised, frankly, by how much that rhetoric was beaten back, and seemed to really, millions of Americans seem to really come out and say, not so much. Where, the whole being totally anti-democracy thing, we're not so sure about that. So that was really encouraging. And the last thing I'll say too is, I'm no longer the sprightly, early 20s person that I was when I started out doing campaign work, but I'm still very personally motivated by the youth and, in the future through young people. And it's very easy to feel like, very doom and gloom about the future. So many kind of frightening things when you pay attention to politics in the national environment. And one thing that was hugely encouraging to me was just the insane number of young people that turned out in this election. That was another thing that was really unexpected. That was something that made a huge difference in races that we supported as an organization, and also in really like critical, important national and federal level races. People love to kind of talk about young people not turning out and not paying attention, not caring, and being stuck in their phones all day, etc. But I think this cycle really drove home for me how there is a lot of hope for the future, because regardless of age or party or what state you're in, etc., there really are millions of people across the country who are willing to go out there and support the causes that they care about. And there's millions of people that agree that regardless of the fine details we might differ on, we should have a democracy in a country that is representative for all of us and that is actually working for our future. So lots to be hopeful about, I feel like.
Well, thank you for your work on that. And thank you, Anna Scanlon, for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to be here.
All right.
Great to be in California.
Yeah, welcome to the state.
Very happy to be here. Hope to never leave.
And I hope the traffic doesn't get to you down there in Southern Cal.
It's worth it. That's how I feel about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And for listeners, if you'd like to learn more about the work of Represent Us, you can go to their website, represent.us.